And with Tua Tagovailoa and that injured right hip obviously being the topic of discussion not only here in Tuscaloosa but around the college football world, we figured who better to check in with than Dr. David J. Chao. You can find Dr. Chao on Twitter at ProFootballDoc. Also has his own website, ProFootballDoc.com. So if you haven't already, you're definitely going to want to check out Dr. Chao, both of those outlets. Dr. Chao, welcome to Southern Fried Sports.
Thanks for having me on.
Obviously, the concern with about 3 minutes to go there in the second quarter Saturday in Starkville, Tua Tagovailoa goes down hard on that right knee. Not only goes down hard on that knee, Dr. Chao, but he's got a 240-pound linebacker sort of riding him into the turf. Talk about sort of what comes into play there as far as force and speed and angle of the hip and those type of things, and why what happened to Tua happened the way it did on Saturday.
Yeah, I understand, of course, that I'm happy to come on because you're at the epicenter of what's going on with Tua there. But I'm in San Diego, and I have not examined Tua other than looking at the video. I haven't looked at X-rays or MRIs. This is all from my football experience, et cetera, and orthopedic and sports medicine experience. So standard disclosure there. And quite honestly, I have only seen the Tua video on my cell phone through Twitter as people notified me, as literally I was at Costco with the kids on Saturday when it happened. But unfortunately, the video was obvious enough that immediately I said that's a posterior hip dislocation, and the hope was that there wasn't a fracture, but of course there is, and that's why he's having surgery. But that mechanism is pretty typical, and, I feel for him. It's no doubt that it would elicit anyone to scream in pain. It's very painful. This is a motor vehicle type accident. This often happens when you get in a head-on collision and your knee hits the dashboard and drives your hip out the back. There's that much force. In Tua's case, not only was it one linebacker, it almost looked like to me there were two people on him, and his knee was caught up flexed, adducted, which is towards the midline, and a little bit of internal rotation, which is what makes the posterior hip area vulnerable. And with all that extra force, much like a car accident, drives the femoral head out of the back of the hip socket. And so that's unfortunately what happened to him.
So we see the medical staff rush onto the field to address Tua, and he had been dealing, as we all know, with the right ankle injury. What's the protocol? You were team physician for the San Diego Chargers for 17-plus years. When you get to the scene of a situation like that, talk about what the first steps are in dealing with the player, and how quickly things can change, maybe based on what you're thinking you're going to get going out there compared to what you actually get feedback and as to what the situation is.
Well, and you never know what you're going to get, not to quote Forrest Gump in Box of Chocolates there, but, you go out there and you see what it is, and you have to look. And in this case, look, if it's obvious to me on Twitter video, it's very obvious to the Alabama medical staff as soon as they get out there. I've dealt with several hip dislocations, and among the most traumatic things, had them in the NFL football player, et cetera. If you think the hip might be dislocated, it's not. It's that obvious. Once you see it, and it's very evident. And even as he was loaded onto the cart, et cetera, you could see the right leg, the right femur, and the position of the right knee was different than the left knee. Like the whole leg was shorter because it was all pushed up and out the back in terms of the hip joint. And so, I'm sure the medical staff did all the right things. The standard things are airway, breathing, circulation first. I'm sure they checked all of that. And then, checked for a pulse and movement in his foot, which there should not be any nerve or artery damage in this type of injury. And the whole next thing was to immobilize him and get it reduced. And the one I had in the NFL, we were able to reduce on the field, on the sideline. It sounds like this one, they did a good job and got it reduced at the stadium. quicker is better, and then obviously did the further assessments from there.
So, Dr. Chao, when you hear that Tua is being transported to Houston for surgery, that automatically, in your mind at least, equates to posterior wall injury of some sort to go along with the dislocation?
Well, I think there have been several reports of fracture, and the type of fracture that you would get here would be a posterior wall fracture. If there was no fracture or no significant fracture, you wouldn't need transfer to Houston or to have surgery. Obviously, he was flown to back home, so to speak, or back to school right after the incident, and then further evaluation decided to be flown to Houston for specialty surgery here. So that's why I think it's posterior wall fracture to restore the stability. And I've tweeted that this is kind of 4 phases here in terms of the injury. Number 1 is to get the hip reduced. Check, they've done that. Number 2 is to make sure it stays reduced, and that's the reason for the surgery, to restore the cup, restore the socket, so it stays in place and it doesn't become, let's say, a Dennis Pitta from the NFL situation where he had several redislocations of the hip. The third thing that you need to avoid is it becoming a Bo Jackson situation with avascular necrosis, and that's where there's a lack of blood supply to the femoral head, and that's when it dies out and becomes arthritic, and that's what happened to Bo Jackson. And contrary to public opinion, and this is where I hope the people in your area can keep their fingers crossed and prayers out to Tua, it wasn't the hip fracture dislocation that ended Bo Jackson's NFL career. It was the subsequent avascular necrosis that did it. So let's hope with the early reduction and with good care that Tua will not get this disease process where he has a lack of blood flow. That's very key. And then the fourth and final thing long term is in terms of post-traumatic arthritis, which he undoubtedly will have some due to the force of it. It's a car that's been in a car accident, so to speak, his hip joint, so you can fix it, but it's never a brand new thing. But how well does it run, and how smooth are the surfaces, and how much arthritis does he get down the road? That's sort of the fourth phase of what's going on. So we're still pretty early in the process with Tua.
Dr. Chao, even with the testing, the scans, the MRIs, things like that have undoubtedly been done maybe multiple times since Saturday afternoon in relation to Tua's hip, is there still, if you're a surgeon in this situation, is there an uncertainty even going into the procedure that you're not exactly sure what you might find once you get in there?
Well, I think you have a pretty good idea what you're going to find when you get in there. Of course, there are different individual differences once you're there in terms of what type of plate you're going to put on, what type of screws, and what angle, and how many. So you have a pretty good idea going in with three-dimensional imaging. Probably, like you for this interview, you had a pretty good idea where we were going with it, but there are going to be some twists and turns that are individual as we keep talking here.
Impossible to say without knowing the outcome of the procedure itself, but you said that you've dealt with an injury or two, I guess, like this in the past. From a football perspective, though, obviously not all that common. And what are some of the key factors moving forward for Tua if he's to return at least close to the form that he was prior to the injury?
Well, I have had an NFL football player, an X-Game athlete. I was the chief medical officer for almost 20 years for ESPN and the X-Games, and actually a rugby player have this on the field, and all three were reduced quickly like this. The NFL player had the dislocation in the preseason, a wide receiver, and returned to play about midway through that season. And even though caught a touchdown pass, but that also was the last year of his career after that. I'm not painting a picture of doom and gloom for Tua. There are some glass half full sides to this. The glass half empty, of course, is the comparison to a Bo Jackson or a Dennis Pitta, whose careers were negatively affected. And, this is a big deal injury. prior to this, I was asked often, how are Tua's left and right ankle surgeries going to affect him in terms of his NFL draft stock? And my answer was, assuming they checked out okay at combines, it wouldn't really affect it at all. This is going to be a different story. This is going to be something that likely affects his draft stock. The question is how much. And the glass half full approach is he's such a superior athlete, even if he loses 5 or 10%, be it of mobility or speed, he's still a superior athlete. He's still someone who has NFL talent, be it from the pocket throwing or certainly 90th percentile mobility, even if he slowed down a little bit here. So that's the upside of him. The big worry is the avascular necrosis, and that's something that's hard to control. And the worry, of course, a little bit is longevity. But that'll all sort itself out after the surgery, et cetera.
Can't thank you enough, Dr. Chao. It's Dr. David J. Chao, former 17-year team physician for the San Diego Chargers. Find all of his great work at Pro Football Doc on Twitter and profootballdoc.com. Thanks a lot, Dr. Chao.
Thank you.